Edwin Shaw missed our wedding for a female subordinate. Facing the reporters who came upon hearing the news, I smiled and covered for him. But afterward, he mocked me. "Chloe Martin, aren't you tired of living like an old maid?" Later, he sold fake medicine that killed someone for her. He even pushed me out in front of the angry crowd. In the chaos, I was trampled to death. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on our wedding day. Taking a few deep breaths, I realized this man was not worth it. I made a quick decision and ran away. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. So painful. I felt parts of my skin being crushed into the mud. Struggling to look out, I saw Edwin's face through the gaps. His expression was panicked, numb, and bewildered. The hand that had just pushed me out was still raised instinctively. Since childhood, he always put others in front when trouble came, never taking responsibility. This was clearly his own mess. I took a deep breath, hoping someone would calm down, and noticed that there was a person under their feet. But this time, the trouble Edwin caused was too big. To buy a seaside villa for his true love, Tina Green, he secretly replaced a batch of company medicine. This led to adverse reactions in some people, and now their families were causing a scene. People had died from consuming it. Who cared if there was a dead person under their feet? I closed my eyes. Edwin Shaw, I only looked away for a moment, and you caused such a mess. My head was dizzy, and my consciousness was fading. My last thought before dying was to warn myself. If there is a next life, please don't meddle in other people's business. Cherish your life, stay away from fools. When I opened my eyes again, the lights were dazzling. People were toasting and chatting among the crowd. It was my and Edwin's wedding banquet. Our wedding banquet was quite a notable event in the industry. The Shaw and Martin families were both well-known leading enterprises locally, and this strong alliance attracted a lot of attention. I steadied myself and glanced at the time. If nothing unexpected happened, in about 5 minutes, Edwin would receive a call from his secretary, Tina Green. Then, under everyone's gaze, he would run out of the hall wearing the groom's suit I had ironed 3 times. Sure enough, the event played out again. I had truly been reborn. I heard murmurs around me. What is Mr. Shaw thinking, running out on his wedding? Mr. Shaw Sr. and the Martin family won't be able to explain this. Don't worry, isn't Miss Martin here? She can handle it. I was still a bit dazed, but what they said was true. In my previous life, I handled it very well. At that time, facing cameras almost shoved into my face and the guests from rival companies attacking me, I smiled and spoke. Mr. Shaw left not for personal reasons but because the company has an urgent matter that requires his personal attention. In front of the company, all personal interests can be set aside, including our wedding. This is why Shaw Group has come this far. For a time, Shaw Group's stock soared. Mr. Shaw Sr. praised me endlessly, saying he was reassured with me by Edwin's side. He even discussed with the Martin family to arrange for me to join the pharmaceutical company Edwin took over after graduation. But Edwin himself sneered at my actions, even mocking me as an old maid. "Chloe Martin, my Tina is different from you. She is sincere and straightforward, doesn't even know how to lie. Unlike you, calculating and only seeing rules and interests, it's disgusting." Thinking of Edwin's face, I couldn't help but recall the pain of being trampled to death by the crowd. I shivered all over. Perhaps this was the result of having nothing better to do than acting like a mother to others. I took a few deep breaths and made a decision in my heart. I looked at the clock on the wall. There were still 5 minutes before the reporters from my previous life would arrive. I stood up and spoke. "Everyone, please leave for now. I need some quiet to think of a response plan." No one suspected anything. After they all left, I grabbed the scissors beside me, cut the hem of my wedding dress with one stroke, jumped out of the window from the back door and ran away. I hid in a small fishing village and fished for 3 days, ignoring all the rumors outside. I heard that after I ran away that day, Mr. Shaw Sr. personally came out to apologize to the guests. At 83 years old, with graying hair, leaning on a cane, he said he had failed to raise his grandson properly. Looking at the photos in the news, I couldn't help but sigh. Sorry, Mr. Shaw Sr., but I really can't handle your grandson. The Shaw and Martin families have been close since my grandfather's generation. They started their businesses together, leading to today's achievements. I'm 25 years old, and I've known Edwin Shaw for 25 years. Mr. Shaw Sr. had always seen me as his future granddaughter-in-law since I was a child. But even though we grew up together, the positions we held were completely different. The Martin family has no sons, only me, a daughter. Since I was young, my parents have told me to be meticulous and thorough in everything I do. A girl has to work harder than a boy to be recognized for her abilities. The Shaw family has no daughters, only Edwin Shaw, their only son. He knew from a young age that he was the favored one, and no matter his behavior, he would inherit the vast family business. Even though Mr. Shaw Sr. and I repeatedly urged him to be ambitious, he always remained carefree and fearless. My grandfather passed away early, and my parents were often too busy with work to take care of me. When I was young, I often went with Edwin to Mr. Shaw Sr.'s home for meals. So from a young age, Edwin had Mr. Shaw Sr. covering for him outside and me cleaning up his messes at school. Time passed day by day. We grew up. And Edwin became useless. Thinking of this, I sighed. He used to be foolish and reckless, but at least he listened. He would call me after getting into trouble, waiting for me to save him with his head down. When I fixed everything and lectured him, he would act cute, saying I was the best and he could never match me in this life. If things had gone according to plan, he and I would have married, living a smooth and mutually dependent life. Like when we were kids, it wouldn't be love, but a bond even more precious. But I forgot, no one can truly live under someone else's wing. The business world is the most ruthless. After he took over the company, a woman named Tina Green appeared by his side. Charming and passionate. Edwin told me he had found love. If I hadn't discovered that this woman was planted by another pharmaceutical company, I might have given them my blessing. But sadly, it was not to be. I hadn't been home long with my bucket of fish when Edwin showed up. In the past life, because I handled things well, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise for the Shaw family. When Edwin returned home, he was merely scolded a bit by Mr. Shaw. Now, seeing my obvious change in attitude, the Shaw family had him come to apologize to me. But Edwin looked reluctant, his eyes filled with resentment. I knew what he meant, he blamed me for not helping him this time. But Edwin, why should I? Chloe, Grandpa made me come. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to see you, you witch. I snickered. You can run away, but if I do, I become a witch. Where's the logic in that? Edwin's voice choked, and he spoke angrily. Chloe Martin. You have a life on your hands. That day, Tina called saying she was pregnant with my child, but because I was going to marry you, she went to the hospital to have an abortion. If you hadn't run away too, Grandpa wouldn't have sent someone to catch me halfway, maybe I could have stopped her. I snickered. You couldn't have stopped her. In the past life, Edwin made it to the hospital, but the child wasn't saved. After all, Tina Green wasn't pregnant from the start. Your lover just used this method to lure you away, creating a scandal for the Shaw and Martin families. Edwin's eyes widened at me. She lost the baby, and you still slander her like this. Chloe Martin, if you're not a witch, then what are you? Edwin's shouting gave me a headache. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes and threw a stack of documents at him. The documents scattered, the words "not pregnant" glaringly obvious. Edwin's expression was complicated, and after a long while, he sighed. Chloe, you don't understand love. Tina loved me so much that she used such a method to get my attention. The same foolish statement as in the past life. I rubbed my temples. All right, I'm too lazy to say more. You're not here to cry over a fake grave today, are you? Edwin clenched his fists, seemingly making a great decision before speaking with difficulty. I've decided, I will marry you, and I agree to let you manage the company with me. But you should know in your heart, I don't love you. I'm only doing this because of family pressure. I only love Tina. I resisted the urge to laugh, speaking mockingly. Edwin Shaw, you're tainted. What makes you think you're still qualified to marry me? His face turned red. Chloe Martin. Don't be ungrateful. You told me that Tina wasn't pregnant because you like me, you're jealous of my love for Tina, right? I was amazed by this twisted logic. Edwin, I just laid out the truth. I'm clean, I don't owe you or Tina Green anything. As for the future, please take your lover and get lost. My parents were sitting on the sofa, one on each side. They had heard the conversation between Edwin and me just now. At this moment, both of them frowned and exchanged a glance before my mom spoke. Chloe, this time Edwin went too far. It's understandable that you were upset and ran away at the wedding, but didn't Grandpa Shaw come and apologize before? This marriage. Before my mom could finish, I interrupted her. Mom, Edwin is hopeless. I'm not marrying him. My dad slammed the table. You child, what nonsense are you talking about? The marriage was arranged by your grandfather personally. You are the Martin family's daughter. If you don't marry into the Shaw family, where else would you go? Moreover, your mom and I believe you acted too impulsively this time. You should have handled it better. Yes, the eldest daughter of the Martin family, famously reliable. But does it mean that only those who cry get candy? I sighed and insisted. Mom, Dad, let's wait and see. If Edwin can't even manage the current branch company, how can we expect him to take on greater responsibilities? The Martin and Shaw families are indeed deeply intertwined. But if we keep indulging Edwin, won't it drag the Martin family down if he causes trouble someday? My parents wanted to say something more, but I turned my back on them and started feeding the fish. Behind me, I heard sighs, and they eventually gave in and went back to their room. It was late. I turned off the lights in the hall, letting the darkness engulf me. I didn't reveal my entire plan. The personal information and fake pregnancy records of Tina Green were actually sent to me by someone else. Since my previous life, someone had been secretly warning me to be wary of her. While in the small fishing village, besides sorting out my thoughts, I also had someone investigate who this person was. As it turned out, it led to a scandal involving Edwin's father in his younger years. Edwin always felt that he could do anything without any worries. Simply because he thought he was the only son of the Shaw family. But according to the investigation results, the Shaw family does not have only one son. Within a few days, the Shaw family sent a message to discuss the wedding date again. Edwin's parent came in person, saying they would handle the matter between their son and Tina Green. Because of my previous attitude, my parents brushed them off. After a while, I received an invitation to a Shaw family banquet. The incident with the last wedding had a negative impact on the Shaw family. This time, to build up Edwin's reputation and wash away his image as a playboy, the Shaw family orchestrated things behind the scenes, allowing Edwin to secure an important project. This banquet was to celebrate. At the banquet, Edwin was dressed in a suit, looking quite presentable. Beside him was Tina Green in a red dress, clinging to him as if she had no bones. Mrs. Shaw, watching from the side, had veins bulging on her forehead. To be honest, Tina is indeed quite pretty, looking pitiful and using adoring eyes when she speaks. She is perfect for a man who isn't very capable but craves recognition. I heard that some time ago, Mrs. Shaw went to the company to fire Tina, but Edwin immaturely went on a hunger strike for several days. Mrs. Shaw had no choice but to give in. Edwin, pushing his luck, threatened the Shaw family the day before the banquet. If they didn't allow Tina to attend the banquet with him, he wouldn't come either. This caused quite a commotion in the Shaw family. I smiled, thinking these little disturbances were nothing, not yet reaching the point of truly harming the family's interests. Edwin saw me and hurried over. As he turned, he stumbled a bit because of Tina's long dress. I looked at him with disdain. From an outsider's perspective, one could see how embarrassing Edwin was when he stood next to me before. Chloe, how about it, this project? If it were you, you wouldn't have secured it so beautifully. Edwin ignored the disdainful looks from those around him and stared at me proudly. I smiled slightly. If I had taken on this project, I wouldn't have needed my family to spend money behind the scenes to make it happen. As expected of Edwin, he actually believed it was his own achievement. I remember that in my previous life, not long after the wedding, I still married Edwin and helped him manage the company. Actually, both Grandpa Shaw and I knew that Edwin had no talent for business. We just needed someone to sit in that position honestly without causing trouble. At least don't hold us back. But Edwin was extremely confident in himself and had many of his own ideas. His foolish and amateurish ideas nearly dragged the company down multiple times. If we hadn't grown up together, I often suspected he was a spy sent by a rival company. Originally, my words still had some influence over him. But before I joined the company, I knew Tina's identity, so I informed Grandpa Shaw immediately and fired her. Edwin resented me for this. Later, I worked hard to fill the gaps Tina left in the company. During this period, Edwin frequently opposed me, challenged my decisions, and stole my projects. It took a lot of effort for me to keep the company profitable. But all of this, in Edwin's eyes, became his own achievements. Now he was talking confidently about how he secured the project. Tina Green, holding his arm, exclaimed in admiration at the right moments. It must be tough for Tina to say so many insincere things. Nowadays, no industry is easy, and being a corporate spy isn't a job for just anyone. After Edwin finished speaking, Tina looked at me. Speaking of which, I haven't thanked Miss Martin yet. I raised an eyebrow. Thank me for what? Because Miss Martin voluntarily stepped aside between us, I could have such a perfect man like Mr. Shaw. After saying this, Tina continued to gaze at Edwin with sparkling eyes. When I heard her dragging out Mr. Shaw, I got goosebumps all over. Edwin gave Tina a gentle smile, then turned to me with a look of disgust. Chloe, you should learn from Tina how to be a woman. Gentle, considerate, kind, and understanding that a man is her world. My expression was complicated. Tina did have some skills. The old Edwin wasn't clear-headed, but he still respected women to some extent. Now, after being flattered by Tina for a few days, he had started to adopt a feudal attitude, talking about men and women at every turn. Just as Edwin was about to continue speaking, Mr. Shaw's voice called him to the stage to give a speech. Edwin took the microphone, full of spirit, talking grandly. I was actually curious about how he would manage the company next. After all, I remembered that at this time, the company was already losing money. From a distance, Tina raised her glass to me, and I smiled in response. On stage, Edwin's voice suddenly paused for a moment. I looked up. He seemed a bit dazed, although it was only for a moment, I still caught it. Not long after, he came down and walked to my side, whispering in my ear. Previously, I did wrong. Given another chance, I wouldn't touch that batch of medicine. I was shocked inside. Edwin, had he also been reborn? Edwin's next words confirmed my suspicions. But they didn't change my impression of him being a fool. Chloe, I know in your past life, you were too in love with me, which made you jealous of Tina and led you to ask Grandpa to fire her. In this life, you have found your way back and haven't interfered in my relationship with Tina. So I naturally didn't have to touch that batch of medicine. In the past life, in Edwin's eyes, I was the malicious heiress obstructing him and his true love. And Tina was the perfect victim being persecuted by me. Edwin already felt guilty towards Tina. Tina constantly whispered in Edwin's ear, revealing her pitiful background. She cried, saying she didn't expect Edwin to give her a complete family, but at least he could provide her with a house. She would be content just thinking of him in the house. Edwin actually believed this nonsense and switched a batch of company medicine to buy a villa for Tina. This ultimately led to a great disaster. But what I didn't expect was that even after dying once, he still hadn't seen Tina's true colors. Chloe! Living another life is a chance given to me by God. I will firmly grasp it. Just like in the beginning of the past life, I will make the company big and strong. I heard you also took over the Martin family company. When the time comes, I'll guide you. Hopeless. I shook my head, facing Edwin, who was still chattering on, and sighed. A fool, living another life, is still a fool. I didn't say much more, raised my glass to the old acquaintance in front of me, and smiled. Then Mr. Shaw, I look forward to it. During this period, I completely took over my family's company and was dizzyingly busy. But fortunately, it was a field I was familiar with, and no one was causing trouble. Everything was proceeding very smoothly. After the company was stabilized, I finally took the time to meet the person who had been secretly sending me messages. Ansel Shaw, Edwin's half-brother and the illegitimate son of Mr. Shaw. I focused on the man in front of me. This face had a three-point resemblance to his useless brother, but gave off a completely different feeling. Ansel Shaw was 2 years younger than me, but his demeanor was very composed. He seemed like a steady and practical person. I opened my mouth. Why did you warn me about Tina Green? Previously, I had also investigated Ansel's background. Mr. Shaw had spent 2 years abroad for business. During these 2 years, he met a female teacher, deceived her into thinking he was single, and got her pregnant. Later, when Mrs. Shaw found out, she didn't blame Mr. Shaw but believed the female teacher had seduced him. So she privately approached the teacher, threatening to expose her as a mistress. In the end, the female teacher was driven to take her own life out of shame. Given his background, I thought Ansel would reveal the ambitions he had suppressed for over 20 years. But the person in front of me lowered his eyes and said, "I just feel sorry for you. Honestly, I find Mr. Shaw's genes hard to evaluate." Fortunately, after a conversation, Ansel Shaw didn't say anything else that would leave me speechless. Before taking her own life, the female teacher entrusted Ansel to the director of an orphanage. She also spread false information saying Ansel had died at birth. Because of this, Ansel was able to grow up smoothly without further persecution from Edwin's mother. Later, Ansel even managed to get into a prestigious overseas university on his own. He was a capable person. I nodded to myself, thinking about how the Shaw family had poured so many resources into Edwin, yet he still underperformed academically. The contrast was stark, and I had an idea. Ansel just needed an opportunity. And I could give him that opportunity. I heard that the pharmaceutical company under Edwin is about to go bankrupt. Due to some of Edwin's genius ideas, half of the company's management team left. In my previous life, the company grew steadily for more than a year under my management. But in this life, it didn't survive 3 months under Edwin. According to Tina's plan, the original intention was to secretly manipulate things and gradually drag the company down. But she later found out that this was completely unnecessary. Edwin could handle the company's collapse all by himself. And it progressed rapidly. Seeing that Edwin's company was going nowhere, Tina gradually revealed her true colors. It was only then that Edwin realized what his so-called love really was. Later, I saw a video interview with Edwin online. A group of reporters blocked the entrance, and as soon as Edwin appeared, they swarmed around him. "Mr. Shaw, when will you announce the company's bankruptcy? Mr. Shaw, do you regret not choosing Miss Martin back then?" Edwin's steps faltered, and his hair looked like it hadn't been taken care of for days. He looked very haggard. Not sure which reporter's question struck a nerve, but he angrily raised his hand and smashed the camera in front of him to the ground. "When Grandpa Shaw came to visit my home," he sighed. "Fortunately, we didn't let Edwin take over the main company directly. Even if this branch goes bankrupt now, it won't shake the Shaw family's foundation. My grandson is completely unreliable. I've always treated you like my own granddaughter. Chloe, don't be annoyed by me. I want to ask you, are you still willing to marry that brat Edwin and save the Shaw family?" The old man in front of me was truly pleading with me, setting aside his pride. My parents didn't say anything upon hearing this, turning to ask for my opinion. Holding a teacup, I stayed silent for a long time. Grandpa Shaw understood my meaning, patted my shoulder, and left. It's my grandson's bad luck. After some time, one of my informants suddenly sent me news about Edwin. The Shaw and Martin families are indeed deeply entangled. If the Shaw family falls, it will ultimately affect the Martin family, so I've always had someone keeping an eye on Edwin. If Edwin had just admitted defeat honestly and acknowledged his lack of ability, that would have been the end of it. But he was once again possessed by a foolish idea. He wanted to sell the copyrights of the pharmaceutical products under the company to someone else. When I told Grandpa Shaw about this, the old man was silent for a while, not saying a word. He looked a bit dazed, not sure what he was thinking. After a while, he came back to his senses, shakily handed me an orange from the table, and told me to eat more. I sighed as I peeled the orange. "Chloe, don't always sigh. Sighing will drive away good luck." He had taught me this since I was little. Looking at the old man in front of me, I felt a bit uneasy. I said, "Grandpa Shaw, how about a game of chess?" When my grandfather was alive, he often played chess with Grandpa Shaw. Edwin didn't understand it, but I was very interested since I was a child and would always watch with wide eyes. I still remember what my grandfather told me. Life is like a game of chess. If you encounter something you really can't understand, then look for the answer on the chessboard. For a while, the only sound in the room was that of chess pieces being placed on the board. After a while, Grandpa Shaw's face showed a troubled expression. "Chloe, your chess skills have improved." I smiled at the old man in front of me and asked, "Grandpa, I want to ask for your advice. When the chess game reaches such a situation, how do you break the deadlock?" The old man's figure seemed to hunch a bit more suddenly. After a long silence, he slowly uttered some words. "Sacrifice the king to save the chariot." The news that the Shaw and Martin families would hold another wedding spread quickly. Continuing the alliance was a decision made jointly by me and Grandpa Shaw. When I got off work, I saw Edwin squatting at my doorstep. He was squatting on the ground like a little puppy, and when he saw me, he quickly stood up and circled around me. "Chloe, I knew you wouldn't ignore me. You have no idea, that bad woman Tina actually deceived me. Truly, the most poisonous thing is a woman's heart. Chloe, I don't mean you're poisonous too. I just mean I've finally realized who truly cares about me. From now on, I'll listen to everything you say." It was only when I got closer that I noticed the wounds on his face. He must have gotten them while sneaking out of his house. Ever since I told Grandpa Shaw about his plan to sell the company's copyrights, the old man had him brought back home. He stripped Edwin of all his powers and found someone new to take over at the company. I stopped in my tracks and stared at the wounds on his face. "Edwin, don't forget to come to the banquet on the 19th next month." Edwin looked puzzled. "My own banquet?" But the fact that I acknowledged him at all was enough to make him happy. "Chloe! I knew you couldn't bear to blame me. Don't worry, I'll make sure I'm extremely handsome for the wedding. I won't embarrass you." After stepping into the house, I shut the door behind me, cutting off Edwin's voice. Upstairs, I looked out the window and saw Edwin still lingering below. When he saw me at the window, he excitedly waved at me. I didn't look any longer and turned to close the curtains. Edwin thought that Grandpa Shaw and I would cover for him again. But he didn't know, he had already been abandoned. This time, the one marrying me was Ansel Shaw. On the 19th. As always, it was a grand wedding banquet. I usually pursued perfectionism, constantly checking the process to ensure nothing would go wrong at the banquet. Edwin used to complain that I was too fussy and troublesome. Luckily, this time standing by my side was Ansel Shaw. He was even more meticulous than I was and understood my tastes and concerns. From the wedding dress to the table decorations, if I so much as frowned, he would immediately instruct the servants to bring a new set. Honestly, having a helper by my side felt pretty good. In the end, everything was perfect. No one came to cause trouble, no one objected, and there was no sign of Mrs. Shaw or Edwin. It wasn't until later that I found out. Edwin hadn't slept the night before my wedding, repeatedly ironing the old groom's suit. But by dawn, no one came to pick him up. Confused, he asked a servant, only to find out that the person marrying me was his younger brother he never knew existed. Edwin tried to rush to the wedding to confront us. As soon as he stepped out of his room, he was firmly held down by people sent by Grandpa Shaw. He had no choice and broke down crying. He smashed everything he could in the room. Mrs. Shaw, heartbroken, went to hug him, but in his frenzy, Edwin accidentally pushed her down the stairs, causing her to suffer a concussion. In the end, realizing he couldn't stop the wedding, Edwin coughed up a mouthful of blood and fell into a coma for 3 days. When I saw Edwin again, he looked even worse. His face was pale, his clothes were wrinkled, and his hands were covered with small cuts. When he saw me come out, his eyes lit up. But the next second, he saw Ansel standing beside me. He clenched his fists and rushed over, but I immediately stopped him. "Edwin! Haven't you caused enough trouble already? Do you still want to play this fighting game?" Ansel, seeing this scene, hid behind me. "Chloe, I'm scared." I said. "You shut up too." When Edwin saw me speak, he tried to grab my sleeve, but I stepped back, and his hand froze in midair. "Chloe, I really know I was wrong, but we used to be so good together. How can you marry someone else? I sneered. Good? Was it good when you hung out with Tina Green behind my back, or when you pushed me into the crowd to be trampled? Edwin, no one will always be by someone else's side. Besides, what we had wasn't really love. Edwin looked unwilling, his eyes red as he questioned me. Then what about him? Is what you have with him love? I glanced at Ansel, who immediately quieted his breathing beside me. Not really, but he's more useful than you. After saying that, I turned and left with Ansel. Edwin was still unwilling to give up. He shouted from behind, saying he was the young master of the Shaw family, and as a member of the Martin family, I could only marry him. I looked back mockingly. Edwin, I hope you understand one thing. It's not because I marry you that I am the daughter-in-law of the Shaw family. But whoever marries me will be the young master of the Shaw family. After returning home, Ansel's mood was noticeably different from usual. Although I found it strange, I didn't care and went to sleep after washing up. I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and found someone standing on the balcony. Ansel was smoking, and cigarette butts were scattered all over the floor. I couldn't help but frown. Don't smoke inside the house from now on. Ansel put out the cigarette at my words and replied obediently. Sorry, I won't do it again. As I lifted my foot to go to the bathroom, I heard Ansel speak again. Chloe, do you remember going to an orphanage for charity when you were in elementary school? A little boy accidentally tripped you. I tilted my head, still a bit groggy and unclear. Did that happen? Sorry, I've done a lot of charity work. Ansel's voice was a bit hoarse. I remember. I remember you wore a white dress with an iris embroidered on it and the words you said. As my mind cleared, images seemed to flash through my head. At that time, after being tripped, my white dress got dirty, and the iris got stained with dust. The little boy who tripped me looked nervous, probably afraid he'd have to pay for it. But I just stood up, patted my dress, and was about to leave when the little boy curiously asked why I didn't cry. I said, crying doesn't help. There will always be accidents in life. When problems arise, just work hard to solve them. Seeing the little boy's dumbfounded expression, I couldn't help but find it funny. I even gave him a book I carried with me. I remember it clearly. The book was Economics for Beginners. I didn't expect that I had met Ansel so early on. I didn't say much more because I really couldn't hold it in. After using the bathroom, Ansel was still standing on the balcony, looking a bit lonely. Since we got married, he never slept in the room, always lying on the couch outside. I sighed and walked over. Getting closer, under the light from outside the window, I realized. Ignoring Ansel's aloof demeanor, his features actually looked more obedient than Edwin's, and his hair looked nice to touch. I couldn't help but ruffle it. I remember now. You took my book, so you have to work harder in the company from now on, got it? Ansel looked at me and nodded. All right, go wash up and sleep in the room. If you keep sleeping on the couch and catch a cold, people will think I'm mistreating my employees. After the wedding, Grandpa Shaw asked Ansel to try managing a branch company to practice. This time, he didn't ask for my help but gave me a nominal position at the Shaw Company. If Ansel made any mistakes, I had the authority to dismiss him directly. So he could be considered my subordinate. I turned around, yawning, and went back to the room. A laugh came from behind. All right. On the weekend, when Ansel and I went to my parents' house, we heard them talking about Edwin paralyzing Tina in a car accident. Edwin will probably go to jail this time. According to my mom, ever since the wedding, Edwin had been in a daze, buying drinks all day. After drinking, he would go crazy and smash things, causing chaos in the Shaw household. It angered the old man so much that he had to take heart medication every day. Grandpa Shaw was afraid he would cause trouble, so he had someone watch over him at home. But one rainy day, Edwin took advantage of a shift change and ran out of the house. He had been drinking and still dared to drive. As fate would have it, he ran into Tina while driving and got out of the car to apologize to her on my behalf, trying to win me back. But as he walked up behind Tina, he overheard her on the phone with someone. I hope there are more fools like Edwin Shaw, it makes my job so much easier. You wouldn't believe it, I told him I admired him, and he actually believed me. The way he looked at me was hilarious. After hearing this, Edwin went crazy, got back in the car, and stepped on the gas, driving straight into Tina. He thought the short distance wouldn't cause any harm, but because it was snowy, the car skidded and ran over Tina. After the incident, Edwin sobered up immediately. Ignoring the fact that Tina was still lying in the snow, he ran home in fear, crying and begging Grandpa Shaw to save him. But this time, the old man was determined. Debts must be paid, and murderers must face justice. This is an unchanging truth. As your grandfather, it's my failure that you grew up to be such a cowardly and irresponsible person. I will hire the best lawyer for you, but that's all I can do. Grandpa Shaw then called the police. When the police got involved, they found the call records of Tina and other people. The police had already been investigating some cases related to corporate warfare. The person Tina was talking to before her accident was their target. Following this lead, they uncovered many things. The company behind Tina also collapsed. Over the years, they had been taking money to do dirty work. They incited crimes to bring down certain companies and committed all sorts of evil deeds. Countless families were torn apart because of them. Tina's misfortune was a case of bad karma. During the court hearing, Edwin screamed and shouted, making a scene. I am the eldest son of the Shaw family. My grandfather is Henry Shaw. My fiancée is Chloe Martin. I will give you Chloe's phone number, you can contact her. She won't abandon me. But no one paid attention to him, and he was forcibly taken away. Tina didn't die but was left in a vegetative state, with no certainty of when she might wake up. Over the years, she had made a lot of money, not only from her salary but also by tricking several men into buying her houses. Unfortunately, all that ill-gotten money was confiscated. Edwin was sentenced to life imprisonment for drunk driving and hit and run. Later, a bystander uploaded a video of Edwin hitting Tina online. Public opinion surged, and the Shaw family was once again in the spotlight. Later, Mr. Shaw held a press conference. He announced that Edwin was actually an adopted son of the Shaw family. The real young master of the Shaw family is Ansel Shaw. This matter didn't take long to die down, and soon no one was discussing it anymore. Now, when people mention the young master of the Shaw family, they only think of Ansel Shaw, who speaks gently and steadily but acts with decisive swiftness. However, the young master whom many people fear remains as obedient as ever in front of me. Until one day, I accidentally saw his phone. I discovered that on the snowy day when Edwin went out, he sent a location message to someone. It was exactly where Tina had her accident. I didn't turn off the phone but left it open on that screen on the table. Actually, I don't really care about the truth of this incident. I just don't like it when people around me hide things from me. When Ansel came out after his shower and saw the screen on the phone on the table, he looked at me with wet eyes and said, Chloe, I just thought bad people should be taught a lesson. And I was afraid you would think I was naughty and dislike me if you knew, so I didn't dare to tell you. Interesting, so this guy is dark inside too. Seeing my displeased expression, he suddenly panicked a little. But I would never hurt you, never. I curved my lips into a smile. Don't let it happen again. Before Grandpa Shaw passed away, he handed over the main company to Ansel. Actually, he wanted Ansel and me to take over the company together. But I refused. Ansel is capable, meticulous, and his market insight is no worse than Grandpa Shaw's back in the day. He doesn't need anyone else's help. I smiled and said to Grandpa Shaw, Grandpa, if one day you're worried, just let me have a nominal position at the main company. There are many businesses connecting the Shaw and Martin families. If I think Ansel is doing something wrong, I'll directly remove him from his position. Grandpa Shaw shook his head helplessly. You cheeky girl, all right, I trust you. Later, I focused on developing the Martin family business. The Martin family has no sons. But the Martin family has me. Gradually, the Martin family, which was somewhat lagging behind the Shaw family, started to surpass them. This put a lot of pressure on Ansel, who was determined to prove himself to me. Watching Ansel still reading documents in the early hours, I nodded to myself. This is great. Both families can grow strong together. Just like the Shaw and Martin families did in the beginning.